Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be doing another tier list. I know a lot of people like these tier lists, so I got another one for you today. This one is pretty global. This covers sort of the global politics aspect of my channel. In this case, I'll be actually ranking pretty prominent world leaders. I think this list was made in 2019 or 2020 because some of these leaders are no longer in power. But the way I'll be ranking these leaders is based on three criteria. Number one, how significant they were to their country, so their contributions to their country. Number two, how their contributions were viewed around the world. And number three, how impactful these contributions were in a general sense. This includes the globe and their own country, and how they're perceived. So, without further ado, let's get straight to it. So, first up, we got Angela Merkel. She was the leader of Germany. She was the chancellor of Germany. Very long time she was there. I think she just stepped down probably 4 years ago now. And now it's Olaf Scholz. But she was there for a pretty long time and she was pretty impactful. With that being said, I don't think she's an A tier or an S tier. I'll put her at a B tier. I think she was a pretty good leader. She had very good diplomacy with other countries. People respected Germany. People respected her. And she set a precedent by being the first ever woman to be a chancellor. So I think you definitely got to give her points for that, for being a pioneer in her respective position. Next up, we got Bashar al-Assad. I I want to be as objective as possible, but I think I'm going to put it in a D tier. Nobody likes this guy. The Syrian civil war started because of him. His family's been in power for way too long. He's just a dictator who loves killing people, and he just doesn't seem to have control of his country, especially since he has a bunch of terrorist organizations that are running loose in Syria. And ever since he's been in power, it's been nothing but chaos and destruction. He should have just stuck to whatever surgery uh, he used to specialize in, because I know he was a surgeon before. Next up, we got Jair Bolsonaro. So another guy who's gone now. He was the leader of Brazil, president of Brazil. He got replaced by quite the opposite of what his political views are. Someone who's pretty far on the left, Lula da Silva. I want to put Jair at an A. And the reason why I put him there is because although a lot of people found him to be quite polarizing, many people liked him. The world did think he was sort of weird. At least some countries did, especially the West, because the media loves to portray people such as Bolsonaro as, erratic people. But I don't think he was a terrible leader. He did end up losing. It was a pretty close election. But I don't think he's an S tier, but he's a pretty good leader for his country at the time that he was there. Boris Johnson, I'm going to put him at a C. I can't put him quite at a D because he did last longer than the other conservative prime ministers. I'm looking at Liz Truss when I say that. But I feel like Boris Johnson was really the start of the end for the UK. And he was just not someone that you would find as being a reliable prime minister. He was a pretty big figure in Brexit, so he did really spearhead that movement. Many British people have differing views on that, but he's sort of a hypocrite too because he was telling people to stay home during COVID. Meanwhile, he was having a bunch of parties and that kind of stuff, so there's that sort of scandal. And I just can't give him much credit except for the fact that he was the start of the end for the Conservative Party in the UK. Next up, we got Erdogan, and his ranking that I'm gonna give him is gonna ruffle a lot of feathers. I'm gonna put him in A tier. Erdogan has been pretty different from other modern Turkish leaders in the sense that he sort of returned to that religious conservative view of what Turkey should be. But he's also been a pretty good leader in the sense that he's helped a lot with mediating conflicts between the West and countries such as Russia, China, and Iran. So, for example, they had a deal between Russia and Ukraine for grains, I believe, a few years ago, and Turkey served as a mediator. And another example that I can give is recently they had a prisoner swap between Russia and the U.S., a big prisoner swap, and this all occurred in Turkey. So Turkey sort of established itself as this middle power that is going to play both sides while still doing what's in their best interest. Now, I can't put him in S tier because the economy hasn't been good and their currency is not that strong. So he definitely has some work to do on that front. But I think overall, Erdogan has been a very strong leader and a very stable leader for Turkey. And he's really cemented their position as a very potential mediator between large countries, mainly the United States and the West, and Russia, China, and Iran. So that axis of resistance. Next up, we got North Korea, Kim Jong Un. I don't really know how I could rank him because there's not much information of what he's done policy wise. Just based on his nature and his position and his strength, I'm going to put him in a C tier. I would put him in S or A if we had actual confirmation that he had a large number of nuclear arms, but he did sort of get tamed down when President Trump tried to speak to him and they started negotiating. There's not much else to say about Kim Jong Un. He's part of a family dynasty, and North Korea has never been a really strong country, but there have been some indications that he's been helping Russia in their war in Ukraine. So I guess he's sort of been helping on that front in case he does decide to try to launch an attack on South Korea eventually. So sort of cementing himself as being really, really, really anti-West and never even considering looking the other way. So I think I'm going to put him in a C tier. We don't really know how long he's going to stay based on his health. And there's many rumors that his sister actually has a lot of power. So again, I can't really bring him up because of that. Next up, we got Macron. Emmanuel Macron, I'm going to rate him based on his current situation. I'm putting him at a C tier. He's just the most average, boring politician you'll ever see. He's a centrist. Nobody likes him. The only thing I could give him credit for is the fact that he didn't get absolutely blown out in the recent French elections. There's a lot of speculation that there would be a large far-right wing wave in France, but I will give him credit. He did sort of minimize that damage by dropping out in the ridings or in the districts in which he knew he had no chance, and rather endorsing the leftist candidates there. So I guess that was a smart political decision. As a leader, he's been a very boring leader. Hasn't really done much for France. I guess he has some controversy in terms of the whole pension thing with seniors. But he's just been sort of like this supporting character, and he's not a strong French leader. French have always been relatively strong in the West, but this guy he's just kind of boring, and he's probably going to be gone within a few years, especially considering his current political situation, which he barely held on by a thread. And then next, we have Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is another controversial one. I'm going to put Netanyahu at a B tier. And the reason why I'm putting him in B tier is putting aside the Israel-Gaza war, because I know that's a very controversial topic. I'm not going to talk about that much. The people of Israel really do like him, at least from my understanding. He does have some baggage in terms of the corruption cases, but he's pretty well known across Israel. A lot of people do respect him, and he's been able to cling on to power for a long time, so he's really cemented himself as a pretty strong leader. For looking at his actual influence, he's been pretty powerful in the Israel-Gaza war. He's been very strong on his stances, but he's also shifted a lot to the right in Israel. So a lot of people don't like that. I'm going to put him in a B tier. I just don't think he's going to be there after the Israel-Gaza war is done, but he's been there for a long time. I think this is Jacinda something. I don't know what her last name is. She's the leader of New Zealand. I don't like her at all. She's really one of those leaders that doesn't know what she's doing, or at least didn't know what she was doing. She seemed like a leader that was based purely on emotion. So everything she did was very, very socialist, but she had no plan as to how she's going to fund those things. And she ended up dropping out, or stepping down, whatever you want to call it. And she just didn't last as long as she could have, because her policies were, for being frank, they were pretty radical. So I think it's good that New Zealand has a new leader now. She's just not a great leader. Again, New Zealand is not typically known as a strong power But if we were to rank him on this list, they're definitely the weakest country out of all these. And I think that's partly attributed to the fact that she's the leader and didn't really do anything to help our country advance and become a stronger power, especially in the age of the rising threat of China. And since New Zealand is in the Pacific or in the Oceania, so they could have really been a great strategic ally, but didn't do so. Next up, we got Shinzo Abe. Rest in peace. He got assassinated in 2021 or 2022, something like that. From what I understand, Shinzo Abe was a very respected leader. He was very well known in Japan. People really liked him, but he was pretty conservative in Japan, or at least in Japanese politics. But I think he was very good diplomatically. He strengthened the alliance with the United States and the West, so he really cemented himself as a Western leaning, or he at least established Japan as a Western leaning country, and he cemented Japan's position as a very reliable ally in the Pacific. So I got to give him credit there, but rest in peace to him again. I think he's a good leader, A tier. Justin Trudeau. So I'm Canadian, for those of you that don't know, and I'm not even just saying this out of bias, but this guy is arguably the worst prime minister in history. He's going straight to D tier. Where do I even begin with this guy? I mean, in terms of internal policy, so domestic policy, he has done absolutely nothing that has been productive, except the only tangible piece of legislation that you could attribute to his success would be the legalization of marijuana, at least on a federal level. But other than that, there hasn't been much else that he's done. He's just sort of destroyed the country. He has never met the 2% NATO defense target. He wants to reach it by 2030. Is it going to happen? Probably not. He's a complete joke. People hate him in the country. And he's going to be gone by 2025. He's going to lose in the next election. So now we have the last three. So these are the strong men of this list. So this includes Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, President Putin of Russia, and then President Xi of China. I'll start off with President Xi of China. I'm putting him in S tier. And I'm not a communist. I'm not a leftist. I'm not an authoritarian. But I'm just saying this based on what the people of China think and what the world thinks. Now, I know China is very polarizing, and it's a very divisive topic to talk about China and praise them. But we can't deny the fact that they have been advancing really, really rapidly under Xi Jinping's leadership. China's been very stable. They unfortunately did acquire Hong Kong through illegal means, but that's neither here nor there. If we are to incorporate that, yes, we could bump him down, but based on his country's significance, and many people forgot about the Hong Kong thing, by the way. But if we're looking at policy-wise, he has really strengthened his relationship with our friend here, President Putin, and also the president of Iran, to sort of create this axis of resistance, which is essentially, we could call it almost a modern-day Cold War. So basically, you have the Eastern powers and the Western powers. The Eastern powers compose of those three countries, China, Russia, and Iran. And then the Western countries and the Western axis is primarily the United States, Britain, and France. But he's really been spearheading that movement to include China. And there's also been reports that he's actually been involved, or China has been involved in the Ukraine war. And I think the last thing that he has, at least on his agenda, in terms of foreign policy, would be an invasion of Taiwan. Will he do that? We don't know. But the Chinese people overwhelmingly support an invasion of Taiwan. And if there's anyone that will go forward with that, it will be Xi Jinping. But I think in terms of consequentiality and influence, Xi Jinping is definitely an S-tier world leader. He's also been able to control China with an iron fist. So he's been able to quell any sort of protest or any sort of uprising against him and his administration. So we got to give him credit there. President Putin, I'm going to put him at an S tier. President Putin knew exactly what he was doing all the time, and his decision to invade Ukraine was a very calculated decision. Unfortunately, he caught the West by surprise. The West thought that by supporting Ukraine through this sort of proxy war, they would be able to beat him, but unfortunately that has not panned out for them. Putin has been able to sort of win this war, or at least seems to be winning this war in a long run situation. And he's been very liked in Russia. He's still very liked. He won re-election recently, kind of a rigged one, but then again, we don't know the exact specifics, but most likely it was a rigged one. He won like 81% of the vote or something. It probably wasn't that much, but they don't really have any real opposition in Russia. But in terms of influence and strength, he's really done a lot to sort of restore Russia to its former Soviet past, or at least move in that direction, first with the invasion of Ukraine. Now, there are some things that are negative about him, such as the almost military coup that Russia experienced last year with Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. But then again, he brought in his iron fist and absolutely crushed him by shooting down his airplane and killing him. So again, he cemented himself as the man in Russia by doing so. So I think Putin is an S tier leader in general. Then we got Donald Trump. I'm going to put Donald Trump at... Actually, no. First, I'll explain what I think. No, not D tier. Okay, I'm not going to put him at D tier. I'm going to put him at S tier. Donald Trump had the U.S. or had the world on lock. He had every country respect the United States. So every country in the world pretty much understood if you mess with the U.S., Donald Trump and the U.S. government are going to go after you and they're going to destroy you. He had it under control. There were no wars under him. In terms of domestic policy, he was a pretty good leader. He had the largest tax cuts. He had a very strong economy until COVID. And there were many other things. Criminal justice reform. The list goes on. And he tried to pull out of Afghanistan. And he also signed the Abraham Accords, which brought some peace to the Middle East. So if we're looking at foreign policy, he was pretty successful on that front. I think overall his image is pretty tainted by the media. That's a whole other story. But I think as a leader and in terms of foreign and domestic influence, he was definitely an S tier president. Putting his rhetoric aside, he was a very good president in terms of policy. So that's my tier list, everyone. Just let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why or why not? Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.